I was expecting Frankenstein to be a moody, slightly horrific read for October. I wasn't expecting it to be so beautifully poetic and moving, literally moved me to tear up, and have so much to say about the pursuit of knowledge and education that reminded me of The Abolition of Man by C.S. Lewis. This was a surprise, and this is my spoiler-free review. Hello friends, and welcome to my channel. My name is Haley, and I am a Christian wife, homeschooling mother of 3, out to redeem my very own literary education. And there is no better classic book to read in the month of October than Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. This book, this character is iconic, but the book is absolutely not what I expected at all based off of its portrayal in Hollywood. Which, who is shocked by that, right? In Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, we start the book out with a man named Fulton writing a letter to his sister. He is out on a ship amongst the ice in the middle of nowhere, out on this adventure, and while out on his adventure, he picks up a man in a small skiff who is near death and learns this incredible tale of this man's great woe in life. And that is the story of the monster that Frankenstein created. So Frankenstein is the name of the doctor, not the name of the monster. He is actually never named. But what really surprised me about Frankenstein is what it had to say about the pursuit of knowledge. So Dr. Frankenstein is recounting his tale to this Mr. Fulton because he sees in him a young version of himself, and he is out to completely deter him for such passionate pursuits of knowledge that can lead you into the wrong. So one quote from this book that I found incredibly interesting was this: "A human being in perfection ought always to preserve a calm and peaceful mind, and never to allow passion or a transitory desire to disturb his tranquility. I do not think that the pursuit of knowledge is an exception to this rule. If the study to which you apply yourself has a tendency to weaken your affections and to destroy your taste for those simple pleasures in which no alloy can possibly mix, then that study is certainly unlawful, that is to say, not befitting to the human mind." So Dr. Frankenstein goes on this incredible pursuit of passion. He is determined to do something completely revolutionary in science. He holds himself away and dives in and starts basically doing this horrific experiment. He discovers the secret to life, which he does not and will not reveal to Fulton, and he's out to create this perfect being. And while he is in the process of making this creature, he's almost in this mad state of passion. He is so into his work that he's not really even letting his heart tell him that it's wrong. There are points that he says he was so loathed with and disgusted with what he was doing, but he couldn't stop. He had to finish this. And the second he finished it and saw the monster awake, open his eyes, it absolutely destroyed him. He was horrified. He could not believe what he had done, and he ran away completely frightened, scaring the monster, the creature, away himself in the process. He was horrified by what he did, and yet he so passionately pursued it in the moment. And this was his great downfall. And so he goes on with his life trying to recover from what he did, vowing never to mess with such things again. And then a couple of years later, the monster comes back to him. And the monster was basically on his own, alone in the world, trying to figure out how to eat, how to survive. And he watches this poor cottage family. There is a father who is a blind man, there is a young brother and sister, and they are poor and humble people, but there is so much love and affection in their family dynamic that the monster starts longing for that. He longs to be good, he longs to be virtuous and kind, and he wants love, just like he sees from this family. He knows he's alone in the world. He's had a few instances where he's encountered people, but they've all been frightened by him, or they try to harm him and kill him, and he doesn't really understand why. It was so sad reading that part of the book. I felt terrible for him. I'm like, it's kind of not his fault that he was created and abandoned. And this book actually references Paradise Lost by John Milton quite a bit, particularly the character of Satan in Paradise Lost. So as this monster is trying to learn about the world and virtues, he learns how to read and speak basically by watching this family teach someone else to do it, and he sits in on the conversations and learns. And so then he reads Paradise Lost by John Milton, Plutarch's Lives, and then another book. Well, I just read Paradise Lost, and at the back of it, Mary Shelley had some commentary on it, and you can tell that that really inspired this character of the monster, because he goes through a lot of those same similar feelings that Satan has. He feels completely rejected. There is even a point where he says almost the same words, "Let evil be my good." So basically, if no one is going to love me and accept me despite my desire to be good, then forget it. I'm just going to be this evil creature out to take revenge on my creator because he won't love me either. And in some ways, you kind of don't blame him. And this also reminded me of Wuthering Heights Heathcliff. When a character or a person experiences a lot of rejection, a lot of malice, maltreatment, and violence, in turn, they tend to pour that back out on the world. Now, is this right? No, because the monster could have chosen virtue regardless of how anybody else treats them. That's what Jesus calls us to as Christians. But ultimately, he decides, no, I'm going to take it out on Dr. Frankenstein. When he comes back to Dr. Frankenstein and recounts his tale of what's been happening to him, Dr. Frankenstein at first kind of has this sympathy towards him, like, as the creator, I probably owe this creature some form of happiness. And yet, because the monster gets Frankenstein's personal family into some real trouble and horrific, terrible, violent situations, Dr. Frankenstein can't see this creature for anything more than a monster. And that's kind of the question of this book. Is he a monster? Or does he deserve a second chance? Does he deserve love? He begs Dr. Frankenstein to create a wife for him, someone at the very least who has the same deformities, who has the same type of countenance that everybody's afraid of, but they could love each other. And Dr. Frankenstein is just mixed with sympathy and disgust, and then he's wrestling with himself. Should I do this for him? Is this right? Is this wrong? Should I give it a shot or absolutely not? And he does make a promise to the monster that he is indeed going to create a wife for him. And then in the process, just can't do it because he wonders, well, what if she, being created, decides that she wants to live a life of revenge against human race because she doesn't like how she's treated. I can't trust her nor her potential influence over this monster, which made me think of Adam and Eve. The monster at one point says, I should be thy Adam, but I am more like Satan. But even Satan had friends and I do not. This book tore at my heart, and it was so beautifully and poetically written. I read Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte very recently, and that book was incredibly atmospheric and poetic. This book blew that one out of the water in the form of poetry, and I'm not even shocked because Mary Shelley was the wife of Percy Shelley, who was a really great romantic poet. And of course, Mary Shelley was a poet in her own right. There are literal poems in here that she wrote for this story. But just the writing in general, I felt like I was going through and underlining absolutely everything. It was that good. And so you're constantly wrestling with this question of, does this monster deserve happiness? Does he deserve death? What about his actions? They're wrong, but do you blame him? It was a very... This book was one that really makes you think about life, about the pursuit of knowledge, about what is going too far and what isn't. I am blown away. I wasn't expecting this. So if you are looking for an atmospheric and moody and poetic read for fall or winter, I would recommend this one. I would recommend this one over Wuthering Heights. Now, in the first part, this book is split into 3 volumes. The first 2 volumes are very poetic and beautiful, and they're not super dark. The 3rd volume, when the creature determines to basically be a monster, that's when you kind of get the horror side of the science fiction story. And that was intense. But even at the ending, the way that the monster finally meets and reconciles everything that's happened with Frankenstein, you're still slightly pulled to some form of sympathy for him. I don't know. Just read it. It's very short. I flew through this book. I could not get my eyes away from it. I wanted to know what happened next, and it was just so beautifully written that I wanted to live in it. So, if you're looking for a fall or winter read, I highly recommend Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. And if you have children, because I'm a homeschooling mother and because I love this book, I would highly recommend this picture book biography about Mary Shelley and how she created the story of Frankenstein. And this is called She Made a Monster: How Mary Shelley Created Frankenstein. It's a really short picture book about, well, how she came up with the story of Frankenstein. But the illustrations are very moody and dark, but also lovely. And my daughter loved it. I read it to her and she loved the illustrations. She told me she would like to write a story afterwards. She is 6 years old. She is currently in kindergarten, if you're wondering. But this book was just so fun to read to her, especially after finishing Frankenstein. I loved it. She loved it. It takes a bit of fictional liberty in telling the story, so there's a few slight changes she makes to make this a more compelling story that moves a bit faster, but she explains those in the back of the book in a very short author's note. And I did read this aloud to my daughter once I finished the book. She sat and listened to it. It's not very long, but it's a little bit more historically accurate account of Mary Shelley. So, I highly recommend Frankenstein for you, and I highly recommend She Made a Monster for your children. I hope this video encouraged you to pick up Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. If you've read it, please let me know in the comments below what your thoughts were, and if you haven't read it, I highly encourage you to do so. I will see you next time, friends. Happy reading!